no big deal until you read what some humiliation and actual physical harm people were subjected to.
Yep. And when you look at how it affects juveniles and women, we get into even more issues. So we know, Megan, that most practices are state specific. For our listeners who don't know about this, a lot of, the state police have jurisdiction to decide how they want to operate. So I want to just take a moment and talk about stop and frisk in New York City. Thankfully, New York City has dramatically reduced their use of stop and frisk. But in 2010, which was really the peak of the city's use of this practice, Black residents in New York City were 8 times more likely to be stopped by police than white residents, and 11 times more likely to be frisked. So we know that this was being used disproportionately. And we also know that the use of force was in 23% of stops of Black people, but only 16% of stops of white people.
So we've at a time when there was no oversight on this either. So the difference now is that, when this went through the courts, by the way, it was litigated in one of the federal courts in which I worked in my days as a probation officer and worked for one of those judges. And now there is much stronger oversight over it, which if you agree with stop and frisk or you don't, at least there should always have been oversight over the policy to make sure it's operating appropriately.
Yeah, and thankfully we have come a long way with that, but we have many other issues we can turn our attention to.
Sure.
We've also heard of this term driving while Black.
Yes.
People of color are 3 times as likely as whites to be searched when they are pulled over, and Blacks are twice as likely as whites to be arrested when they are pulled over. When we talk about drug use, we know that whites and Black use drugs at the same rate. However, of course, they are treated very differently. And the pattern for this treatment of Black males and females is very similar. But we know that, since we're talking about females here, let's talk about a case. Have you heard of Diangelo Becton?
I have heard of her. She was a young teenager who was stopped improperly at a party. Maybe you could fill me in on the rest of the details.
Yeah. So she was just 15 years old. She was at a pool party and she was arrested by the police in a violent episode in Texas. So what happened was the pool party probably got a little out of control. I mean, they're kids hanging out, having fun.
Right.
Some people were allegedly arguing and the police were called to the scene. And of course, they told the teenagers to disperse. And really, you could just see this video yourself. Thankfully, we have the ability to see a lot of this footage so you can go see it yourself. But what happened was she was leaving the party like she was told, and a white male officer grabbed her, dragged her on the ground by her hair, and dragged her to the sidewalk. Other officers drew their weapons, and Megan, an officer, put his knee on her back. What does that remind you of?
Right. We're seeing this play out again. I remember this now, and I remember the video, and I think he actually I'm pretty sure he applied his whole weight, both knees, and I think she was a small girl, so both full knees on the back. I mean, yeah. And that's going to compress her breathing.
Absolutely. So needless to say, you should never put your knees in someone's back or on their neck, right? We shouldn't even have to be saying that out loud. Right?
I think so. I think there's any policy, any physical use of force that is going to reduce or seriously constrict someone's ability to breathe should probably just be prohibited.
Absolutely.
Great.
So Diangelo would end up suing the department and winning about $150,000 settlement. And more importantly, the police officer who held her down, he would resign. I would have liked to see maybe him face some charges, but
we probably weren't there yet, and it probably wasn't. It was not a great reflection and not strong policing, but it wasn't as serious as what we've seen, or obviously it wasn't fatal. And I'm going to guess that the department offered him the option, but not really the option. You're resigning. And that's how they handled that one.
Yeah. So I think here, just to end out this section, let's revise the use of force. Let's make our policies more sensible.
Yeah, I think it was, I was teaching about this in my policy class, and I think it was Las Vegas recently, a couple of years ago. They revised their policies to make them much clearer and to also take out some of the more harmful physical practices. And I think that other departments are following, and it's a great time for almost all departments who are not, up to date to revise their policies on use of force. That is definitely a practical implication here. I have to say now more than ever, I realize it's definitely important to try to eat right, but I don't really want to sacrifice tasty foods to have to do so. With Daily Harvest, I don't have to give up either. Daily Harvest delivers delicious, clean food right to your door. Daily Harvest never uses preservatives, added sugars, or any artificial ingredients. They actually work directly with farms, and they freeze organic fruits and vegetables at peak ripeness to give you all the best nutrients and taste.
I don't know if you know this or not, but they're actually in the process of transitioning to 100% compostable, recyclable packaging. And they're actually 50% of the way there already. They're really all around doing a great thing.
They can keep my house fully stocked with clean food built on whole fruits and vegetables that are actually really delicious.
And also, I don't know about you, but there's a lot of ingredients that I would never think to pick up in the store, like dragon fruit. When was the last time you bought a dragon fruit?
Never. I saw that and I thought the same thing. Okay. Ingredients that I would never think to put in my own smoothies. Mm-hmm. You're right. And so for like a smoothie, I don't usually make smoothies because I always find it's a pain to chop everything and prepare it. But, you know, Daily Harvest is giving you a smoothie that's pre-prepared. All you need to do is dump it into the blender, put a little bit of milk or other liquid in it, blend it up, and you're good to go within 2 minutes. So I find that the ease is one of the best parts. Good food, easy to prepare, easy to maintain, environmentally responsible. We really hope that you will consider trying Daily Harvest and that you love it as much as we do. Go to dailyharvest.com and enter the promo code WOMEN to get $25 off of your first box.
So again, that's promo code WOMEN, WOMEN, for $25 off your first box at dailyharvest.com. So let's move on to arrest. Obviously, after contact with police, there may or may not be an arrest, but let's talk about what it looks like for Black men and women. Black Americans are 27% of all individuals arrested in the United States. Now, that might not seem like a high number. However, that's double their share of the total population.
Right, because the total population is 13%, correct? So
Correct.
Okay, so I get it then.
Yes, so it's disproportionate when you actually look at the numbers. We can't just talk about percentages without understanding the reference group they're coming from.
Sure.
So why is this happening? It's important to note where are the police hanging out, because if you are looking for it, you will find it. Megan, where do you see a bigger police presence? In Newark, New Jersey, or in Madison, New Jersey, where we teach?
I have seen very little police presence in Madison. Yeah. So yes, I see a disproportionate police presence in Newark, which I pass by frequently.
Yes. So the point here is the police are in areas that are disproportionately African American, and that is, of course, feeding into why these numbers are so high.
Sure.
More than 1 in 4 people arrested for drug violations in 2015 were Black. But when you look at who's actually using and purchasing drugs, the numbers are the same for white and Black Americans.
Right, I knew that too.
Blacks are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for a marijuana possession as compared to whites. And again, their marijuana uses is comparable. So we don't even need to explain it. No. It's pretty clear what's going on here.
The numbers are clear on this, I think, on this issue.
Yep. So Megan, I'm sure you have heard of Sandra Bland.
I have heard of her, and once again, I don't know the full story on this one, but I suspect you do.
Yeah, I actually think we might want to do an episode on just her case because it's so important.
Okay.
Just to give you a brief view of what happened, she was a 28-year-old Black woman, and she was found dead in a jail cell in 2015 in Texas.
Okay.
So what led to this? Well, she had been in jail for 3 days prior to her suicide. And the reason she was in jail is because she could not gather the bail money. And I'm going to tell you what her offense was.
Okay.
So I just want to say, some people might argue that since she took her own life, the officers really bear no fault. But you really need to look beneath the surface here. Because when you look at the video evidence, most of what Sandra took herself with her cell phone, it is clear that the arresting officer wrongfully arrested Sandra Bland. What started out as a minor traffic violation escalated into the officer forcefully removing Bland from her vehicle after a series of back and forth verbal exchanges. And the officer demanded that she not record him with her phone, but thankfully she did not comply and she kept recording. That's how we have all this evidence. He slammed her to the ground and then he handcuffed her face down. So the video evidence shows some heated words between the two, but absolutely no instance of Bland striking the officer. Yet Sandra Bland was held in county jail for 3 days on the charge of assaulting the officer. So some people say, of course, she did not die at the hands of the police, but a lot of people wonder, should she have even been in jail in the first place?
Wait, so she committed suicide after 3 days in jail. And you said she was incarcerated there waiting or being held. She couldn't pay bail, which we know is a common problem. But there was no actual sign of her raising a hand or nothing. Okay.
And of course, there's always going to be people that argue not everything was on camera, but I think there's enough evidence here to suggest a possible unlawful arrest. At the very least, this actually brings us to the next topic. Why was she she wasn't able to afford bail? She's nonviolent. Why are we holding her in jail for 3 days?
Well, I have to tell you, this is one of my main areas of research. And what I can tell you is that, well, first of all, the perversion of our system really is cash bail. And it's just a fact that people are stuck in jail, not necessarily because they're violent or they're a flight risk, but they're stuck in jail because they don't have the money to pay. For some people, $500 might as well be $5 million if they don't have the resources. Just to be clear on that. Bail also, when I've looked at all the factors that affect bail, whether it's race, whether it's other factors, we'll see that Black and Hispanic offenders are more likely almost always to be denied any form of bail. They usually have, when they are granted bail, they're usually going to have a higher monetary bail set. And then they're more likely down the line to be detained because they can't, in fact, pay their bail. And what happens is a lot of times, unfortunately, Black defendants and Latino defendants are assessed to be higher safety and flight risks because of, they might have criminal records. And there might be other factors that are usually related, honestly, to their socioeconomic disadvantages. And therefore, there's a perception of them that is really an unfair one. So what usually happens is that Black Americans will wind up incarcerated in local jails. And this is pre-trial at a rate, these numbers vary just so you know, but it's going to be actually at a rate of 2 to 4 times that of non-Hispanic white defendants. What's the problem here? Well, the problem is that there's a disproportionately holding minorities because they cannot afford to pay bail. But the other problem here really relates to what that does down the line. And what I mean is that there have been a lot of scholars and a lot of people who study sentencing. But I had this great professor when I was getting my PhD, Dr. McCoy, and she said, I don't know why they start with sentencing. That is at the very end of the process. Look at what pretrial does. So what pretrial does is it affects every single decision point down the line. And what that means is that if you are detained prior to trial, if you're held on bail, you are going to have increased odds of conviction, and you're actually going to be most likely or more likely to be sentenced to prison and receive longer sentences. So
I also want to add that when people are held before, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but you're essentially being held before you're convicted. But something else that goes along with this is if you're being detained, you're losing your job. You can't pay the bills. You might lose family. It's the collateral consequences, just like we see upon reentry. We see upon people after they serve time in jail, even for a short of 2 days. If you have a job that you can't go to and you tell your bosses because you're in jail, there's a good chance they're not going to welcome you back with open arms.
Absolutely true. So it's all the consequences of this. And now you know that, unfortunately, Black Americans suffer this more so. So the policy implication here at the end is really get rid of cash bail. It's really unfair. And there are many other ways to ensure people come back to court. And there are tons of other conditions that you can also impose if you worry about their safety. And cash bail, I'm happy to say, Amy, New Jersey and many other states have reformed their bail. We're in a second bail reform movement. So we are actually seeing progress in this area. And I'm kind of proud to say that and see that. And I think you're going to see many other states getting rid of or drastically limiting cash bail. This crisis has reminded us that we are all vulnerable and that it's okay to reach out for support.
Some days when I'm stuck at home, it doesn't feel easy to, get up and get dressed and do the little things that you're supposed to do to be a functioning human being.
While we may not be able to shake hands, high five,